My name is Daniel Harper. I'm a 42-year-old small business owner, a husband of 12 years, and until recently, a man who believed in unconditional loyalty. Before everything fell apart, I had what most people would call a good life. I ran a modest but successful landscaping business in Phoenix. My wife Lena worked part-time at a local boutique. We had a house in the suburbs, a golden retriever named Max, and what I thought was a peaceful marriage. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Every month, I diligently put a portion of my income into a shared savings account. Vacations, emergencies, our future. It was all there, building quietly with each passing year. Nearly $218,000, my life savings. Lena and I had been together since our late 20s. She was beautiful, social, and I thought, loyal. We met in college during a volunteer cleanup event. Ironic now, because I had no idea she'd be the one to wreck everything years later. But it all started to shift a few months before my surgery. You see, I was diagnosed with a benign but dangerously positioned tumor in my lower abdomen. Non-life-threatening, the doctors said. But surgery was inevitable. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Lena, telling her about the procedure, about the risks, about the 6-week recovery time. She looked concerned, but something in her eyes felt disconnected. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was worried about the business or the bills or just scared for me. I didn't press. In the days leading up to the operation, Lena became more distant. More phone time, late nights scrolling, less talk, less warmth. She'd started hanging out more with her old friend Michelle, who I hadn't heard about in years. And when I asked questions, she'd get defensive or brush it off. "I just need to decompress," she said one night. "You're always worried about something, Daniel." And maybe she was right. I was worried. About the surgery, about business slowing down while I was away, about leaving everything in her hands, the finances, the dog, the house. But what I didn't know was that Lena had been preparing for something else entirely. The night before my surgery, she didn't come home. She claimed she stayed at Michelle's after having too much wine. I believed her. I didn't want to fight, not with the biggest operation of my life the next morning. That was my mistake. The surgery was rough, more complicated than they expected. I was in the hospital longer, 10 days instead of 5. And during those 10 days, while I was heavily medicated, stitched up, and clinging to rest, my wife was cleaning me out. She visited one time, for 20 minutes, said she was too emotionally drained to keep coming. But what she didn't tell me was that while I was lying in that sterile hospital room, she was draining our joint savings account, every cent, transferred slowly over several days to a hidden personal account. She also went to our home safe and took the $3,500 in emergency cash I'd kept hidden in a box marked tax receipts. And then, on the 10th day, the very day I was discharged, I received an email. Not a call, not a face-to-face conversation, an email. It was from Lena. Subject line, "I'm sorry." Inside was a 2-paragraph letter. She was filing for divorce. Said she needed to find herself, and that money would only complicate things. No explanation, no apology for the withdrawals, just that it was for the best, and that I shouldn't contact her directly. All future communication would go through her lawyer. I was in shock. The woman I'd built a life with had left me via email and taken everything. But what she didn't realize was that I had already anticipated betrayal. What she didn't know was that I was 3 steps ahead, because 5 months earlier, during a quiet evening when Lena thought I was asleep, I saw something that changed everything. And from that moment on, I started documenting, recording, preparing. For war. 5 months before I was ever wheeled into that operating room, before the surgery, before the bank withdrawals, before the email, I woke up at 1:36 a.m. to the glow of Lena's phone lighting up our bedroom. She was asleep beside me, her back turned, and her phone was buzzing on silent. A text message. I didn't mean to look, but curiosity won. I leaned over. The preview read, "Miss you tonight, same time tomorrow." No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it, heart pounding. I put the phone back, laid on my back, and stared at the ceiling for what felt like an hour. The next morning, I asked Lena casually if everything was okay. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "Why wouldn't it be?" That's when I knew something was off. something was very, very wrong. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I made a decision that changed everything. I started watching. Every evening, when she said she was heading to her yoga class, I checked the location history on our shared Google account. She hadn't been to the gym in weeks. One night, I followed her. I stayed 2 cars behind. She drove to a hotel on the edge of town, a cheap, discreet place that rented rooms by the hour. I parked a block away and watched from across the street. 10 minutes later, a man in a hoodie pulled up in a black Nissan. She greeted him at the door. They kissed. It hit me like a sledgehammer, but I didn't react. I took pictures. I went back to that hotel 2 more times over the next month. Same car, same room number, same man. Eventually I learned his name. His name was Thomas Riley. He worked in commercial construction, divorced, no kids. A quiet guy, but not too careful. I never confronted either of them. Instead, I did something smarter. I called an old friend, Marcus, a private investigator I'd helped with some landscaping contracts years earlier. I told him everything and hired him to document the affair with timestamps, photos, everything. It took him 3 weeks to build a file 2 inches thick. When I had everything, I went to a lawyer. I asked about prenups, assets, and contingencies. We never signed a prenup, but Arizona is a community property state, which meant Lena could technically take half if I didn't prepare. So I did. I quietly moved the majority of my business assets into a separate LLC under my brother's name. Temporarily. I shifted the land titles and equipment leases so they couldn't be touched. Lena never noticed. Then I opened a secondary bank account in another state under a trust name. I started slowly transferring money from our joint account over a few weeks, just a few hundred at a time, enough to avoid suspicion, enough to look like daily business expenses. I left the bulk untouched. Why? Because I wanted to see how far she'd go. I documented every single transfer she made. Every time she accessed the account, I had it flagged. I had screenshots, timestamps, statements. When she emptied the account during my hospital stay, I already had backups. The account she cleaned out, it was just the bait. The real savings, the account with the inheritance money from my father, the business profits, and the backup reserves, was untouched. Because she didn't know it existed. And that wasn't even the best part. When I got home from the hospital and saw her email, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smiled. Because the next move was mine. 3 days after I got home from the hospital, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Lena had already moved out. All her clothes, jewelry, even her art prints were gone. All she left behind was the dog bowl and a folded piece of paper with her lawyer's contact info. Max, our dog, sat by the door every night waiting for her. That hurt more than anything. But I didn't have time to grieve. I had work to do. The first thing I did was meet with my attorney, Susan Cho. Sharp. Relentless. The kind of person who doesn't flinch when you tell her, I want to burn this down legally without making a single misstep. I handed her the PI folder. The hotel receipts, the photos, the GPS logs, text screenshots, financial statements. Everything. She nodded slowly as she flipped through the binder. She's going to regret doing this, she said. Then I asked Susan a question I'd been holding on to for weeks. If someone committed financial fraud and stole over $200,000, what happens? She looked up at me. If we can prove intent, that's felony theft. You could press charges, but it'll get messy. I didn't care about messy. I cared about truth. And I cared about making sure she never did this to anyone else. I asked Susan to file a temporary injunction on the divorce until financial fraud was investigated. I submitted a full forensic breakdown of our shared accounts, highlighting the exact dates Lena accessed funds while I was hospitalized and incapacitated. In parallel, Susan filed a restraining order on my behalf, not because Lena had threatened me, but because I had reason to believe she was acting in bad faith and might attempt to interfere with my recovery or assets. And then, this was the best part, I reached out to Thomas Riley's ex-wife. She didn't like Lena either. Turns out, Lena had been around during their messy separation, and she suspected Lena played a role in their split. We exchanged notes. She gave me additional evidence about Lena and Thomas's financial involvement. Apparently, Thomas had just co-signed a lease with Lena for a new apartment downtown, while still paying alimony. The moment I got all this together, I made my move. I scheduled a meeting with Lena and her lawyer under the pretense of amicable separation discussions. She showed up in heels, freshly done hair, and a fake smile. I showed up with Susan, 2 printed binders, and a voice recorder on the table. Lena's face dropped when she saw the file. She tried to act confused. "What is this?" Susan opened to page 1, a photo of Lena and Thomas kissing in front of the hotel, time-stamped to the minute. I stayed quiet, just watched her squirm. Her lawyer asked for a break, classic stalling tactic. But it was too late. That same morning, Susan had filed motions for financial misconduct, spousal abandonment, and fraudulent transfer of marital assets. Lena had unknowingly incriminated herself when she transferred money during my hospitalization, a period where I was documented as sedated and physically unable to consent to large withdrawals. And now, the court was going to see all of it. The confrontation ended not in yelling or tears, but in silence, because Lena knew she was caught. She'd tried to bury me, but I'd already built the shovel. The courtroom smelled like old wood and anxiety. I wore a black suit and a steel blue tie, nothing flashy. I wasn't here to show off. I was here to finish what she started. Lena arrived 15 minutes late, flanked by her lawyer and clutching a designer handbag she probably bought with our money. She looked nervous, eyes darting, lips tight. She scanned the courtroom for Thomas. He wasn't there. That was my doing. You see, Thomas Riley had his own problems now. Just 2 days before the trial, his ex-wife filed for full custody of their son, citing instability and a relationship with a woman under investigation for financial fraud. The court had flagged his lease and questioned his finances. Lena was alone now, legally, emotionally, and soon, financially. The judge, a sharp middle-aged woman named Honra Marissa Delgado, called the court to order. My lawyer Susan stood first, calm, confident, surgical. She laid everything out. My hospitalization, the email divorce, the full withdrawal of our joint account, the secret affair, the fake alibi, the photos, the GPS data. She detailed how Lena had accessed over $214,000 while I was recovering from surgery, without my knowledge or legal consent. Then came the kicker. Susan handed over the forensic accounting report. Line by line, it showed where every dollar went. Designer shoes, apartment lease, a deposit to Thomas Riley's personal account. Cash withdrawals from an ATM less than a mile from the hotel. Lena's lawyer objected, claimed circumstantial context. But Judge Delgado wasn't impressed. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Lena. "Mrs. Cross, do you dispute withdrawing over $200,000 while your husband was incapacitated?" Lena's voice cracked. "I thought he was dying. I didn't know what would happen. I panicked." The judge replied flatly, "You bought a $2,300 handbag and a lease on a luxury apartment. That's not panic. That's planning." There was silence. Then Lena made a fatal mistake. She stood up, without being asked, and tried to defend herself. "He was never around, always working. I supported him while he built that business. I deserve half." Judge Delgado looked directly at her. "And you would have received half had you not committed fraud." Boom. The next 30 minutes sealed the deal. Susan requested that the court invalidate the joint account claims based on fraudulent withdrawal. We argued that Lena had forfeited equitable rights by committing financial misconduct. We also requested that the divorce settlement exclude the contested funds and that damages be awarded for emotional distress and attempted concealment. And the judge agreed. The ruling came down like thunder. Lena was ordered to return $178,000 in marital funds. She would receive no spousal support. The apartment lease? Invalid, due to her using misappropriated funds. The divorce was granted in full, with an addendum for fraud and financial abuse. Lena's face went pale, her jaw trembled. But it wasn't over, because after court, I walked right past her and whispered, "3 steps ahead, Lena, always." She didn't respond. She just sat on the bench outside the courtroom and cried into her hands. The days after the ruling were quieter than I expected. No celebration, no champagne, just quiet and peace. I went home that evening, sat on the floor with Max, my dog, and let it all settle in. I wasn't rich again, not yet, but I had something Lena never could buy or steal. Clarity. The first thing I did was close every old bank account, cancel every shared credit card, and open new ones under a trust I'd created with Susan's help. No more joint anything, just me, and a layer of protection I wish I had the first time. Then I made a call I'd been dreading, to my parents. They knew something was wrong when I'd been in the hospital but didn't press. I told them everything, and surprisingly, they didn't judge. My dad said something I'll never forget. It takes wisdom to know when someone's poison, and courage to let them go. I needed both. With their blessing, I started to rebuild my business. I'd sold my company to a mid-sized firm just before the hospital scare. I still had my name, my experience, and a few loyal clients who remembered what I'd done for them. I started taking meetings, coffee shops, Zoom calls, late-night brainstorms with just a whiteboard and my determination. I was coming back, not because of revenge, but because I refused to let someone else's betrayal define me. But life wasn't done throwing curveballs. 2 months later, I got a call from Thomas Riley. He asked to meet, said it was important. I agreed, out of curiosity more than anything. We met at a quiet diner. He looked rough, unshaven, tired, eyes bloodshot. I lost my job, he said without preamble. My ex took full custody. I'm being audited. And Lena, she left me, took the last of my savings and ghosted me. I sipped my coffee. I warned you. I know, he said. You were right. He slid a manila envelope across the table. What's this? I asked. Everything she did. The apartment lease, the receipts, the screenshots. She was planning to go after your business patents next. Thought maybe you should know. I took it, said nothing, then stood up and walked away. That was closure. I didn't need revenge. I'd already won. The next few months were about growth. I rebranded my consulting firm, hired 2 young analysts who reminded me of myself 10 years ago, and launched a podcast on resilience and personal recovery. It took off. Turns out, a lot of people had been burned by people they trusted. I turned my story into strength, my pain into purpose. And Lena, the last I heard, she moved to another city, changed her last name, probably trying to start over. I wish her well, truly, because forgiveness isn't about letting them win. It's about freeing yourself. And as I stood in my new office, sunlight pouring through the window, Max curled at my feet. I finally felt it. Freedom. I used to think betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to you. I was wrong. The worst thing is staying broken after it happens. Because pain, it's inevitable. But what you do with that pain, that's where character is built. In the months that followed the court ruling, the rebuilding, the podcast, and the quiet healing, I learned some truths. Not just about Lena or Thomas or even myself, but about life, trust, and the strength you don't know you have until you're forced to find it. Let me share some of them with you. Lesson 1. If someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. The signs were there. The late nights, the disappearing money, the distance. But I rationalized it. I made excuses because I loved her. Love without truth is a slow death. Trust your instincts. They're usually smarter than your heart. Lesson 2. Protect yourself, legally and emotionally. A shared bank account is a beautiful thing. Until it's not. I learned the hard way that financial protection isn't paranoia. It's maturity. Now, everything I do is layered with safeguards. Not because I expect betrayal, but because I've seen what happens when you're unprepared. Lesson 3. Revenge is loud, healing is silent. When Lena emptied our account and sent that email, part of me wanted to ruin her, humiliate her, make her feel what I felt. But revenge is a fire that eventually burns you too. So I chose strategy. I chose quiet steps, collected proof, stayed calm. And in the end, she destroyed herself with her own lies. That's a better ending than any revenge fantasy. Lesson 4. You are not what they did to you. For weeks after the betrayal, I walked around like a ghost. I felt used, discarded, less than human. But I wasn't, and neither are you, if you're going through something like this. You are not their lie. You are your comeback. Lesson 5. The right people will show up when you're honest. Once I started telling my story, on my podcast, in interviews, in small networking events, people came forward, with support, with shared stories, with kindness. Authenticity attracts authenticity. Don't hide your scars. They're proof you survived. Now, I wake up in a small but beautiful apartment. My business is growing. I have a network of clients who value what I bring to the table. My dog Max greets me every morning like I'm the most important person in the world. And maybe to him I am. I'm not rich, but I'm free. I'm not bitter, I'm awake. And I'll never ever ignore my gut again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you went through or gave you strength to move forward, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life narratives, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps others know they're not alone. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.